Again, I also want to thank Carlton Eley for allowing me to participate in this pristine panel discussion today. My project is how I use social impact assessments to develop a $4.8 million community mitigation plan, and thus created opportunities for the communities in the North Charleston area. So those of you not familiar with the city of North Charleston, we're located on the East Coast. We're about 10 miles inland from the city of Charleston. We're bordered by the Cooper River as well as the Ashley River in North Charleston. And we're home to the number 4 port in the United States. The social impact assessment for which this project was based is the Port of Charleston. In 2003, the State Ports Authority, state of South Carolina, began its process in 2003 to develop a new port terminal. This terminal, at a cost of $7 million, they applied to the Army Corps of Engineers for a dredge permit to build a new port terminal and a new port access road. At full build-out, the terminal will have 3 berths and about 13 cranes to operate, removal of about over 200 acres of container storage space. This project actually consists of about 4 additional projects, one being the new port terminal, the second being widening and dredging of the Charleston Port Harbor from about 45 feet to 52 feet to accommodate the new Penx ships that were coming in addition to a new intermodal transportation container facility that would handle the freight-related traffic coming into the port. The total investment of this infrastructure improvement, public investment, was about $2 billion. How I began this process was with the review of 3 very important documents. The first was the 1969 National Environmental Protection Act, or NEPA it's referred to, which requires federal agencies to analyze and also provide opportunities for meaningful public engagement. The second was Executive Order 12898, signed by President Clinton in 1994, that strengthened NEPA, but also required federal agencies to look at the disproportionate impacts their federal activities or programs had on low-income and minority communities. And the third document was the permit itself. While the Corps issued a conditional permit, it had over 800 comments to the permit, and it required the State Ports Authority to look at, fully assess the impacts related to low-income and minority communities, and to avoid, minimize, rectify, and reduce or compensate for losses associated with the construction and operation of the new port terminal and port access road. They often say a person is the sum of their experiences. And it was about during this time in 2005, after the Corps released the draft environmental impact statement, I was feeling very marginalized as a professional planner, specifically a transportation planner, working in a city that did not give me a fair shake. And so I felt in my input regarding transportation projects that had occurred prior to that time. Also, I was a little perturbed by the traditional community engagement processes of regulatory agencies and state agencies at that time when it came to community engagement. The regulatory agencies and staffers, it was clear to me, and this is again in 2005 before diversity training became to the forefront, that they had no idea of how to interact and work and exchange ideas with persons of color. In addition, these so-called experts often made, I'm sorry, Carlton is showing me the sign, I got 10 minutes, often made the participants look foolish by what they did not know or what they said or how they said it. So I hosted several tutorials after the draft environmental impact statement was released with the communities. And you have to keep in mind, we only had 30 days to provide comments. So on my own time, I hosted a series of tutorials with the communities, and the draft EIS was over 700 pages long. And we went through this night after night on my own time and on the weekends, just educating them and making sure I used my professional relationship with the city and also the regulators to ensure that the community had a true seat at the table. Armed with the knowledge, they weren't dissuaded or intimidated by the process that they were engaged in, and they also knew the technical jargon that went along with the EIS. My goal was only to maximize the community benefits afforded them by the regulations and to minimize the negative impacts that they were experiencing. This is just a snapshot of the social economic environment of the North Charleston community that was identified in the draft EIS. As you can see, while the area had over 30% high school graduation rates, which was higher than those in Charleston County and the region, the poverty rates were 3 times higher. In addition, they were losing population, about a third of the population lost in the time period that the draft environmental impact statement was released. During the comment period and following release of the draft EIS, I commented, one of my comments on behalf of the city under the mayor's signature was that the Corps conduct an EJ analysis. Now, my mayor at that time, he did not know what an EJ analysis was. So I kind of slipped that into the comments period, but I knew what it was. The requirements of Executive Order 12898 did not define the terms minority or low income according to the Corps. However, I provided the Corps guidance that was allowed in the Council on Environmental Quality. And the Corps conducted the environmental justice analysis based on the racial composition and income levels within the community study areas. And they determined that the environmental threshold was met, environmental justice threshold was met. So the Corps determined that it was met based on income and also the minority population levels. I also took the time to review with the community the direct, cumulative, indirect, and public interest factors that the community was facing at that time. We prioritized all of their impacts, and I made sure that they fell under requirements that the impact did not go beyond the extent of the project impacts, that the mitigation did not go beyond the extent of the project impacts. Some of the impacts that were identified included the proliferation of container storage within the community, noise impacts, structural damage that the residents perceived to be the result of existing rail operations, the disintegration of community by displacement and relocation as a result of the port access road. We also made note of the cumulative impacts that would further industrialize the area. Residents had complained years about the incinerator, the stench, the emissions, and the truck traffic. The incinerator was one of the highest polluters of mercury in the area. So we were able to show the cumulative impacts of living in an industrialized area. Residents also voiced objection to approving an air quality permit that will allow the expansion of an existing coal terminal that was located less than 2 miles from where they lived, primarily because of concerns about diminished air quality and coal debris, PM 2.5, resulting from increased truck traffic. This is a snapshot of the community impact areas. There were over 33 neighborhoods that were identified in the community impact area. However, because of the EIS process is so long and arduous, only about 7 of the neighborhoods actually end up benefiting from the overall community impact plan. This is the social impact assessment that we went through, prioritized and categorized. We identified the property impact, the project impacts, the direct, indirect, cumulative, and social impacts, and also the proposed remedy. One example that we use is that the number of adjacent properties were being downsized and from residential to heavy industrial in support of port development. This directly led to a decrease in the property value, speculation, and continuance of racial segregation and isolation. As a remedy, a community housing trust was developed in hopes of stabilizing the neighborhood and replenishing the neighborhood with energy efficiency housing stock. As a result, this is the elements of the $4 million community mitigation plan that consists of a housing trust, environmental monitoring, education, a maritime training institute. Again, while we were able to show that this community had one of the highest high school graduation rates, yet they had one of the highest poverty rates. So there was a disconnect in institutional discrimination with the hiring practice, particularly at the port, for not blue-collar jobs, but white-collar jobs. So we created the Maritime Training Center in order to afford the training and skill level needed to meet those jobs. And I am out of time, so I'm going. This is how the community mitigation plan fits into the overall port plan. As you can see, the resulting community mitigation plan was on par with the environmental plan, roughly about $4 million. We created a tri-party agreement between the city, the community, and the State Ports Authority. The city would be the physical agent, and by that I meant we were the caretakers of the funds. The community at that time did not have the wherewithal or the controls in place to take on that large amount of funds at one time. By no means do we dictate to the community how they spend the funds. We're simply the caretakers, the bankers for the community. And again, we had an agreement to that effect. Project outcomes. We received national, state, and local recognition. We've thus far leveraged over $3 million in matching grant funds, and the social impact assessment serves as a model for future NEPA projects within the region. As I mentioned earlier about the building of a new intermodal container transfer facility, well, that EIS will be coming online April of 2016. And I've already talked to Public Railways, which is the owner of the new intermodal transportation facility, and they've already told me that they've used the model that we have as one of the models going forward to define community mitigation. And I'll be happy to answer any questions. I'm out of time, so thank you for your time.